Hey all, it's Loeks. This video is about fine seedbed preparation. Now, when you are growing a garden, it's really essential to have a seedbed that's actually going to be conducive for the type of seed you're putting in. If you're placing into that bed a radish, for instance, or a carrot, or a squash, there's going to be a number of different aspects to these crops that need to be considered in the seed bed. As an example, a radish has a very small seed, and so you want to have a bed where it's fine enough that the radish seed's not going to get lost in like chunks of soil and sticks and old, debris from pepper stalks and things like that. If you're planting a carrot, you need a seed bed that has a uniformity as well that allows really easy germination, because the carrot actually takes about 2 weeks to germinate sometimes. And so it needs to have constant soil and moisture contact for that germination process not to get interrupted. Squash, on the other hand, has a very large seed, and so it doesn't actually require as fine a seed bed, and in fact is often transplanted, which leaves some opportunities to even use in situ mulch or even allow debris to be a mulch and transplant into it, particularly if you're using a method like the zipper bed, which is sort of the best of both worlds, allowing you to have a debris-rich soil surface and also making sure that you maintain weed-free conditions. So these are some of the reasons that actually folks fail to grow certain crops, because they find, oh, I don't have really good germination. Oh, well, my radish, germinated, but it's really uneven. Well, that's because your bed top was too rough and lots of seeds, were lost or dried out. The cracks opened up from the desiccation of the sun coming out. Carrots, uneven germination, partially because maybe, the debris, maybe you pushed your seeder and it hit a rock or hit some debris and carrots just fell in a big pile. Or maybe you don't have enough even surface to really keep that moisture even, that soil seed contact, And so it's really a process of understanding what you're going to plant, and that'll determine the degree and the style of bed finishing. Overall, what you have to take into account is usually, for most part, coming through the fall, your bed will either have a cover crop in it, like rye or clover, or it'll have debris from previous vegetable crops sitting on the surface, or it might even be mulched down into a straw, or in my case, in some of my plots, I literally have animals grazing on the beds, and there's going to be a manure pack and a straw hay pack. So this is a whole bunch of different varieties of context and a whole bunch of different varieties of conditions that are going to be on the perma bed and in the perma plot coming through the winter and into the spring. And so fine seed bed preparation is about turning those beds over initially and then finishing those seed beds to meet whatever goal it is that you want to meet. Some themes that will be utilized include, mowing cover crop with a handheld weed whacker, covering over cover crop or debris with weed barrier and frying it down, going through and subsoiling it with either a broad fork or a digging fork or a spade, and loosening and lifting up that subsoil to create more looseness, and roughing the bed in again with a rake. And once all this is done, this roughing in, you're going to be more ready to finish the seed bed. So you will have a looser soil down below. You'll have all this debris mowed. A lot of it will be pulled into the path, removed, and you can go through and start to create that fine seed bed. If you're planting squash, again, just mowing it and putting a zipper bed, and you can check out the video on zipper beds, will be enough to then come through and plant the squash. But if you want to finish it for carrots, then it's going to be a process of coming through and either using a tilther, and that's a very specific tool that can be used, especially in conditions that have a lot looser, higher organic matter, or you might consider just using your wide garden rake and really finishing that bed top, working that bed along its length so that your rake is coming like this, and you're pulling this material, dragging it this way, and you're dragging it this way, and you're dragging it this way, and you're dragging it this way to actually get a bed top that eventually has a lot of uniformity in terms of its overall organization. So you end up having a bed top that's very uniform and very well organized, with the majority of the debris and stones and things like that in the path here. And on the top of the bed, a very fine finished seed bed here that is really nice and uniform across the entire length. Really nice and uniform from shoulder top to shoulder top, so that you can come in there and start to do the really last processes that are necessary. Now, one of those is to do a pre-weeding. And pre-weeding means that you're actually weeding the bed top where all the crops are being grown. You're weeding it before you seed your crops. And this can be really beneficial for fast growing crops like radishes, because you want to make sure that they just grow thick and on their own for a really easy harvest. But it's especially beneficial for slow growing crops where the weeds could really outcompete carrots. So this is where I would do a pre-weeding and really make sure that my carrots come up into a really nice seed bed that has no weed competition. Pre-weeding is about preparing that fine seed bed and then even maybe irrigating it a little bit or allowing natural spring rains to come and stimulating the germination of weeds across the bed top. And then you remove the weeds once they've germinated by either raking it and roughing up those weeds because they just barely at their cotyledon, their fine first little radical root stage, or you can come through and use a flame weeder, or you could cover it back over with black tarp and fry it from the heat. However you do this, pre-weeding is an essential component of fine seedbed preparation because it makes sure that you have a seedbed that's already weeded before you even have crops germinating. Really fine-tuned pre-weeding can include planting crops that are slow growing like carrots and flame weeding the bed while the carrot seeds are still inside the bed so that they come up and they emerge into a really recently flame weeded environment. So pretty much fine seedbed preparation is about understanding the crop that you're going to grow and preparing that seedbed to the extent that is required. A crop like squash is not going to require as fine a seedbed, and so really just removing basic debris and mowing it down is all that's needed, and you can transplant right into that, unless you are transplanting lots of squash and you want to be able to use mechanized equipment to dibble, and then you're going to need to do and prepare it the same way. But on a smaller scale, leaving that debris is going to be beneficial for the soil, and using the zipper bed method will be a really effective stage, and you'll simply actually skip over a lot of this finer earthworks. Otherwise, if you're aiming for crops like radish or carrots, doing a really good job doing a fine seed bed, pulling debris, mowing debris, pulling it into your path, your compost-a-path as I like to call it. And you can see the video on compost-a-paths to learn more about how I use paths to create in situ compost. But that process is going to be really important for crops like carrots and radish, leaving a seed bed that then can be really raked really nicely along the length and shoulders, recreating the most even, uniform bed top of a similar width across the whole bed, removing any clods of soil, removing any roots, removing any debris into the path, and then going through the process of pre-weeding, whether you're stimulating that weed growth through irrigation, even using row cover to stimulate it to grow, and then weeding it with a flame weeder or with tarps or just by raking it to get rid of those weeds before you seed, as an essential way of getting ahead of any weed production for sensitive crops. Ultimately, fine seedbed preparation is something that has to be done every time you want to plant a new crop. Again, it's just about the extent of how fine a seedbed you need to prepare, depending on the techniques you use for planting and the crops you need to plant. So there's some food for thought on fine seedbed preparation as a really essential production stage in your garden operations cycle. And I'll see you in the next one.